Can you hear yourself?
Yeah, I can hear myself.
Okay. Hello.
Hi, Sia.
Hi, Julie. Thank you so much for coming on today.
I'm super excited to be with you today.
Me too. I knew the moment I saw you that there was something really special about you. You exhibit this really beautiful curiosity about the world without even having to say all that much. So it's really an honor to be able to talk to you.
And it's so great to see young people doing such great things, and you're so professional.
Thank you.
You're very organized. I just want you to know that. I know that this is you're early in your podcast journey, and yet I've been with a lot of podcasters, and I can tell you're very organized. So
thank you. That means a lot because I continuously feel like I'm a mess every single day. Well, all right. I'll give an introduction so people know who you are. Although I'm sure if you're in the Seattle area, you've heard of Dr. Pham. Dr. Julie Pham is the founder and CEO of CuriosityBased, an organizational development firm based in Seattle. She's the author of the Amazon bestseller, 7 Forms of Respect, a guide to transforming your communication and relationships at work. Dr. Pham has been recognized with numerous awards for her community leadership. She's applied her community building approach to building strong, collaborative, and curious teams. She was born in Saigon, Vietnam, and raised in Seattle. Dr. Pham earned her PhD in history at Cambridge University as a Gates Scholar. She graduated magna cum laude at the University of California, Berkeley as a Haas Scholar. She earned her real-life MBA by running her family's Vietnamese language newspaper during the Great Recession. She has worked as a journalist, historian, university lecturer, marketer, and nonprofit executive, and management consultant. Wow. Welcome.
thank you, Sarah.
Before we start, I just wanted to say I was able to go through your 7 Forms of Respect, and it's beautifully written, so organized and so clear, and I learned a lot. But before we talk about your book, I wanted to kind of get to know you better as a person. So could you tell us a little bit more about who you are? We'll start there, and then we'll get into questions.
Well, just a really important part of my identity is being a Vietnamese refugee, being a Vietnamese boat person. So I was born in Vietnam, and I came over with my parents in 1979. I was a 2-month-old baby at the time, and so growing, and then they founded the first privately owned Vietnamese language newspaper in the Pacific Northwest. And so I think of my parents as hustlers among hustlers. So who I am is so connected to my family's history and service, community.
The podcast is really about getting to the core of who you are as a person and telling your story, and hopefully being able to give young people like myself, because I have no idea what I'm doing with my life and I'm still figuring it out, being able to learn and grow in that process. So I'm really curious what you were like when you were my age, and what the world was like, and what your experience was.
I don't know if I was that curious when I was your age.
No way.
And what I mean by that was I felt very determined. Anyone who knew me when I was in high school and college was just, Julie is very intense and very determined. And I was just going to do this next and this next and this next. And it was really hard for me to be open to different possibilities because I was on such a track. And I went from undergrad straight to grad school. I thought I was going to be an academic. And so I actually wasn't that open to different possible careers and to actually even learning from other people. I really thought of curiosity back then as more book learning, more about the accumulation of knowledge, not as something that could be practiced both inward and outward, and something that could change and evolve over time. I thought of it more as I'm accumulating.
Wow. What can you tell me a little bit more about what you were like at that time? Like what maybe high school and then college was like?
I think that something that's the same is I've always been pretty social. Well, actually, I'll even go even further back. In elementary school, I had a friend. I was sick for a week, and a friend, when I came back to school, my best friend had befriended other people. And so, and I didn't have any friends. So I literally was I had imaginary friends for a long time, actually. And then we moved around a bit. And it wasn't until the later part of middle school and high school where then I actually decided I'm going to not be with any one group. I'm going to be what they call in high school floaters.
That was
people,
me.
right, who have different friend groups and who don't ever feel like they're in just one clique. And so that's the way I was in high school. And then get to college, I was just so excited about meeting as many people as possible. And so I was at this big state school, and I would invite different people over for dinner. So the last 3 years of school, I lived in this house with 4 other women, and every night we were responsible for a night to cook. And on my night, I'd say, I'm going to invite one of my classmates. And so I was constantly bringing over different people, and I just loved getting to meet different people. So I'd say that I wasn't very curious, but I guess I was curious in that I wanted to meet people, but I hadn't really thought about curiosity in the way that I think about it now.
That's really interesting. Wow. And being able to meet so many people and having them over, that seems really cool. But it seems can you tell me a little bit more about like maybe that time in your life and you know, why you think you were the way you were?
I think that, so I went out of state, so I went to Berkeley, and so I didn't have this network of friends that a lot of people at school had friends from high school and things, and I just want to meet people, and every semester would be like, I'm going to meet new people, and so I really was on this just hey, do you want to come over? Just where are you from? And also being an out-of-state student would gravitate to other out-of-state students.
Interesting.
So I think it's the foreigner who always they gravitate to other foreigners, and so yeah, it was in terms of a social life. We would organize lots of parties. There'd be theme parties. Our home it was a very social place. It was really fun. In terms of me and my studies, I got focused pretty early. For my freshman year, I fell in love with the discipline of history. I went to college thinking I would major in law or in English, and I ended up not taking any of those courses. My first semester, I took this history class, and I just fell in love with it. And as I took more history classes, I loved how history is at the intersection of social science and humanities. And what I mean by that is social scientists, they are looking for truth because they believe there is such a thing as truth. And because they're scientists, right? Wow. But in humanities, they know that there's no such thing as truth. And everything is a story. And so history, I think more than any other discipline, sits right at that intersection. It strives for truth, and yet it knows there's no such thing. But it keeps striving, even though there's no such thing, and it's everyone's just distinct perspective. And so by the second year, I started studying with a Vietnamese history specialist, and I learned about we started studying the Vietnam War, and I was reading all these narratives, and they didn't include the South Vietnamese perspective. And my family were from South Vietnam. My father was in the South Vietnamese Navy, and so I asked him about it. I was like, I guess we're the losers. And then he explained to me how our perspective was actually not even included in a lot of American narratives of the Vietnam War. And so as a sophomore, I started to do original research, and I started to interview. I couldn't do this in Vietnamese at the time. I didn't speak Vietnamese at the time. And then it ended up being a much larger project, and I ended up doing interviews with 40 veterans in Sacramento, Seattle, and San Jose, and that was my undergraduate thesis. And so I was actually doing pretty intense original research as an undergrad, and I was just all in. Like I said, I was very outcomes, goal-driven, and once I set my mind to history and I'm going to be an academic, and I was very on that path.
You didn't consider anything else?
Nope, I just, this is what I'm supposed to do.
I relate to that. It's kind of that idea of the narrow path and feeling like you can't venture off. When did you end up, pivoting or switching directions?
So I went straight from undergrad to grad, and I spent most of my 20s writing, doing research, and thinking, I'm going to be an academic. And so it wasn't until I was 28, 29, I started to manage an academic journal, the Journal of Vietnamese Studies. It was a brand new journal, and I went back to Berkeley, and I was helping build this, and I was really a project manager, and I was really building a new venture, and I liked that part. And I liked the networking part and promoting it and creating something new. I didn't like, this is an academic journal, I didn't like all of the egos, managing the egos of the academics and of the researchers. I did all the things, though, that academics are supposed to do. I wrote in peer-reviewed journals. I managed this journal. I got to teach. And yet there was something missing. And then I was in Vietnam at the time. I was 29. I was finishing up my dissertation. And I realized I didn't want to stay in academia. And I'd done all the things I was supposed to do. So I felt like I had a pretty good sense of what it was. And my brother at the time was saying, hey, could you come back and help with the newspaper? Because my family, they have this newspaper. My middle brother started working there. And so that was 2008. And that was when I looked inside. I remember I looked inside and it was just, I don't want to do this. And I think I want to do business. And my brother's asking me to come back and help. And I was also thinking about, I'd been away from my family for about 10 years at that point. We spend so little time with our parents as adults. And so I thought, if I work at the newspaper, the family newspaper, I will never regret that time. I will get to be with my parents as adults forever. How long? I thought at the time it'd be maybe 1 year, 2 years. I didn't realize it would end up being 3 years. But that was the pivot point. I looked inside, I don't want to do this. And I defended my dissertation, and then I came back to Seattle.
Wow, that's really beautiful. You saying that is the first time I've heard someone say, hey, I like went into this career and then career path, and then I ended up not wanting to do that because I felt that way too. I thought law was going to be the end goal for all these years, so I worked for it, and then I got there and something inside me was just like, no.
Yeah, sometimes we just have to trust ourselves and listen to our instincts.
What was your time at the newspaper like?
Oh gosh, it was the best of times and the worst of times. I learned so much at the newspaper. It was hard because I was working with family, and that's also what made it really meaningful. So, and this was also in the wake of the Great Recession, the 2008 recession. So it wasn't just the difficulty, challenges of working with family, which is always going to be challenging. This was also what our whole worldwide economy is down, and the global decline of the newspaper industry, because now people are reading newspapers online, and newspapers that year were closing down everywhere.
Wow.
So many cities used to have 2 newspapers. Seattle used to have the PI and the Seattle Times, and all of these newspapers were shutting down. It felt like the world was collapsing around us, truly. And so that first year was just shock, because the newspaper had been doing really well up to that point. I mean, it supported 3 kids, me and my 2 younger brothers, to go through college. My parents had made a really good livelihood from the newspaper, and then everything switched for everyone. And it felt at times hopeless. And also even though I grew up in the family business, and I think of my parents as hustlers among hustlers, none of my friends had anything to do with small businesses. So they couldn't understand what I was going through. And just having to constantly tighten our belt, like, how do we save $100 here? How do we save $50 here? How do we make payroll? I'll never forget that feeling.
That's incredible that you pushed through. Was there ever a time where you felt like on the brink of, giving up?
Oh my gosh, so many times. There were so many times. Once I actually kicked a hole in the wall at the office, and that's because the first 9 months was hard because I had this American way of doing business, and my parents had a very Vietnamese way of doing business. And what I mean by that in the Vietnamese way is very relationship based. And so there were people who hadn't paid us in over a year. And it was just, we need to collect the money. We need to collect. Oh, no, they'll get it. It was just, but they're still making all these demands and still asking us to make all these changes to their ads. And it's really time consuming. And I'm thinking, when you bill someone, you got to pay. And so I remember once I really felt that there was this one advertiser who was taking advantage of us. And my parents were just, no, we can't do that. We can't say anything. And I got so angry, I actually kicked a hole in the wall.
Oh, my.
And that's how, and my dad said, I think you need to worry about the American advertisers, as in the non-Vietnamese advertisers, and let us take care of the Vietnamese advertisers. And that's actually what ended up prompting my brother and I ended up buying half the newspaper from our parents.
Oh, wow.
There's a Tuesday edition and a Friday edition. So most newspapers only had the weekend edition. We actually had this extra Tuesday edition. So we borrowed money from a community development fund, Rainier Valley Community Development Fund. My brother's car was on collateral, and I Googled how to write a business plan, and we put together a request for a loan, and we bought my parents out for $30,000.
Wow!
And then we were able to actually run a much more aggressive business model, and I think that's actually when things kind of that got more fun, because it moved from just working under our parents to my brother and I having a lot more. I mean, literally ownership. Mm-hmm. And we were able to quadruple the distribution area, triple circulation, run a much more aggressive business model. And we went after corporate advertisers. And I learned that I'm not going to do well with Vietnamese advertisers. So I need to go and find a new space. And I also learned, I learned so much. I learned that I was working hard but not smart. And there's this book called The Entrepreneur's Myth, the E-Myth, and it talks about how most business owners, they spend all their time working in their business, and you actually have to spend at least 20% of your time working on your business. And that was just a revelation for me, and that's when I started to network and to start to really expand. And also during this time, I was doing a lot of volunteering. That's something I hadn't really done before as an academic. And I, as being bilingual, bicultural, people kept pulling me in. Hey, will you help out here? Will you help out there? So I ended up doing a lot of work with small businesses in Rainier Valley and just nonprofit work that I really think of as extracurriculars to my real life MBA. Because that working at the newspaper taught me so much. And that's why I always think when people are, I'm going to go get an MBA, do you need an MBA? Do you need to go back to school? Do you want to learn finance? There are some technical things that an MBA is really good at. But when I hear people say, it's so I can meet people, well, there are other ways you can meet people without spending $150,000. So.
Right. Wow. And that's kind of like how we can talk about education versus getting a degree. I know you went to the highest levels of education. You went to Cambridge, or was it Oxford?
Cambridge.
Okay, good. Cambridge. we got the Oxford out. But I'm so curious. I don't know why, but higher education fascinates me. Maybe because during the entire high school and college process, everyone is just obsessed about getting into the best school and about the prestige and the name, and it's just a big thing, I guess, in our society. So what was your experience like? What were your thoughts? Did you ever feel burnt out?
My parents actually just wanted me to go to University of Washington. So they had no expectation that they were not pushing at all for me to go out of state. They were just, we have a great school here. It's a lot cheaper. Why would you go out of state? And so it was actually my friends in high school. I had really ambitious friends who were applying to Ivy League schools and public Ivies, and they were just, you need to do this. And so it was really, they were the ones who encouraged me. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't have thought about it. And so I then got them to help me navigate the whole application process because my parents didn't know how to do that. Right. My parents were willing, once I made a case, I'm going to study law. Okay, we can make this investment. And just side story, when my mom found out I was studying history, she was so disappointed. So that was the case for undergrad. And in a way, that happened for grad school too, because I was actually dating someone who had gone to Cambridge for his master's. And so he said, you could go to Cambridge. I was like, really? I had never even considered it. I'd never even considered it. I mean, at that point, I knew I was going to go to grad school because I was on that academic track, but I had not thought about going outside of the U.S. And luckily, that year, the Gates Cambridge Fellowship started. And so the Gates Foundation set this up as an equivalent, a counter alternative, I should say, a alternative to the Rhodes Scholarship at Oxford. So this is new money, and Rhodes is like old money. So, and so that's actually what gave me the opportunity to go, because I don't think I would have gone to the UK. And I remember when I told my dad, because I didn't tell him until I got in, until I knew I would get the funding. And I asked, what do you think about Cambridge? And he said, it's a really old place. I said, well, what do you think about me going there for school? And he said, what do you mean? And so later on, he was really proud. It wasn't something, though, that my parents put pressure on. And I think that was just because of lack of knowledge. I mean, my parents met in law school. They were educated in Vietnam. They didn't have a sense, though, of having to go to the best schools here.
We talked a lot about the excitement that happened growing up for you and kind of going on this one track, high school, college. But I'm wondering what some of those lower points were for you, because they're different for everyone, but I'm sure they're also different between generations. And I'm wondering, what it was like for you growing up that was difficult or difficult to navigate.
I had a lot of scarcity mindset and jealousy around friendships and around people. And I think that's because I was raised to think, to be competitive, to really compete with other people, and to see there can only be one person who's number one, and even with friendships, there can only be one best friend. And so I really struggled with that for a lot of my 20s. And that also made me I felt that I wasn't that interesting, actually. And so throughout my 20s, I was just, other people have done this. And so I was constantly comparing myself to other people and what they did. And it wasn't until I lived with my best friend in Hanoi. And this was when I was working on my dissertation. And she was just a few years older than me. And she is just she's also Vietnamese American. She was just so generous and had lots of friends and was so just authentic. And it made me realize that I didn't have to have this scarcity mindset, that there could be abundance, that there could be generosity, and that I am an interesting person. I'm just interesting in my own way. And I learned not to constantly compare myself to what other people have done. I really did struggle with that in my 20s, though.
Was it lonely as well?
It was lonely in that I felt that I couldn't share it with anyone. It was embarrassing to share that. I felt petty because I felt petty, and so I didn't want to share it.
Right. Wow. Do you think it also comes, because I actually resonate with a lot of what you said from that refugee immigrant family mindset, where we feel like we have to make up for our parents' sacrifices, and maybe that's where would that be true for you too? Maybe in a way that you had to succeed.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's that, but I also think that there was a very particular. I think that my mom is a wonderful person, and I think that she really saw people as competitors. And so I was raised with that mindset, and I had to really shift that. And here's an example of that. I remember just maybe 5 years ago, I told her, I think that you're not realizing how there are so many great things in your life. And she was just, I only look up, I never look down. And what she meant by that was I only look at people who have more than me, not people who have less than me. I don't compare myself to people who have less than me. And so I don't think in that way of who has less and who has more. And so that was a process.
Right.
That was a process of unlearning that, because there were all of these messages growing up that it was just even though my parents didn't pressure me to go to Ivy League schools, it was just, oh, well, look at what their kids are doing, or look at this, or look at that. And so there was a constant comparison there.
Yeah, the Asian comparison.
Yeah, right. And so it's just, oh, well, they're doing this, and that fed into a lot of insecurities.
This is kind of a side note, but I've heard too, when I was talking about this with my mom, and she was explaining to me that in Vietnam, everyone had to be kind of suspicious of one another and not be able to trust each other, and you're always comparing with your neighbors because it was kind of a game of survival during the war.
Absolutely. And I actually realized when I first lived in Vietnam how naive I was. Because my parents at first didn't want me to live in Vietnam. I lived on and off in Vietnam for about 5 years during my research, and they didn't want me to live in Vietnam because they thought, oh, you're not going to be able to survive. You're just too nice. We just raised you. You're too soft. And I realized there is something about assuming innocence versus assuming guilt. And so there's this natural suspicion in Vietnam that I could not understand until I lived there.
How did you start to get a grasp on it? I'm curious.
So one very specific example was when I stealing electricity. So it's the story of stealing electricity. And I found out essentially that my stealing electricity and having the head of the ward charge my house for her water bill, because we were the foreigner house, and so she for many years could get away with it until I was just, why are we paying 2 water bills? And then we found out that it was actually this government official who was charging her water bill to us. And when I told people, they were just, oh yeah, you always have to check that.
Oh,
that's what you just have to check. You have to check that stuff because it's on you not to let that happen to you.
Wow. Whoa, so different.
By the 3rd year of working at the newspaper, I was just making so little money, and I was exhausted all the time because the hours were really long. And I felt like as a journalist, I was learning about all these new topics, yet the methodology was the same in terms of business. It was just the way to make money is really through advertising, and advertising was really difficult. And so that's when I started to look for jobs outside of the newspaper. And I was working with 8 people. Half of them had the same last name as me. So it's just, I got to go to a bigger organization. And I was so grateful for getting my real life MBA at the newspaper and meeting a lot of people at the newspaper. And I also knew I had to leave. And so through my volunteering, I met a lot of people who were willing to essentially sponsor me. And what I mean by that is they were willing to use their social capital, make introductions to their friends on my behalf. So I just want to distinguish between mentors and sponsors. A mentor is someone who will give you advice. A sponsor is someone who will use their social capital, their credibility, to endorse you and to put you into spaces that you might not have access to. So getting a mentor, getting advice, way easier than getting a sponsor. And getting a sponsor, the way I was able to get sponsors, because I had a lot of sponsors, was I volunteered for things that they cared about. And I cared about too. And so they could actually see me working and performing, and that gave them faith that I wouldn't make them look bad if they introduced me to people. So I started doing a lot of informational interviews. An informational interview is when you just talk to someone about, hey, what do you do for a living? What does that mean? How can I get into that path? Do you like it? Do you not like it? Just an informational interview is just learning about their job. It's not to get a job. The purpose is just to get to know one another and to learn about what they do. And so the other thing about the informational interview is it gives people a sense of the person who initiated, who wants the informational interview, and you can make a good impression, essentially. So when I was trying to leave the newspaper, I made this huge investment at the time. It was $500 for this this career boot camp. And it was just, oh my gosh, this is such a big amount of money, but I think I need to do this so that I can transition out of the newspaper. And one of the things they told me is, if you want to get a job, there's a formula. If you want to get a job in 3 months, you talk to 5 people a week you know. If you want to get a job in 2 months, you talk to 5 new people a week. And if you want to get a job in 1 month, you talk to 10 new people a week.
Wow.
And so this is informational interviews. And so for those, the students and the young people who are listening to this podcast, you just got to get out there and talk to people and not pin your hopes on one job or one company. It's really a numbers game. It's really about talking to as many people and trying to make as good of an impression as many people as possible so that they will then introduce you to other people, because that's how I met more people. People would have a good conversation with me and say, okay, Julie, I'll introduce you to someone else I know. So I did that for 2 months, 5 new people a week.
Wow.
And that's how I was able to go from my family's Vietnamese newspaper to Microsoft.
Oh, wow.
And that was such a huge change. It was such a huge change. I mean, the type of budgets that they had were just so, oh my gosh, it was just, what? We're paying how much money to design this one small business card that we're only going to use for one event? That's our whole delivery team's salary. Right? So I went from the newspaper to Microsoft, and I was able to do that through a lot of networking. And I was able to do the networking because I had done a lot of volunteering. And so I also think it's possible for people to volunteer their way into learning skills and to also building your network. I think you can do both if you're doing skilled volunteering. And so from there, I went from Microsoft, and then I got laid off. And then I went to another tech company where informational interview. I met the CEO. I didn't think I was going to apply for a job. I didn't even think that there was a job. And he called me the next day and he said, I think you're really cool, and I think you're smart, and you learn fast. And what do you think about coming to work here as a marketing manager? I know you don't know anything, but I'll teach you everything I know.
Wow.
And so and actually, here's another piece of just a tip that I use. So I was talking to someone who mentored me very loosely, that we just met a few times. And he said, Julie, you're really smart. There are a lot of smart people. You need to show how you're going to add value. And so I realized that it wasn't just enough to make a good impression. I then started to put together what I call a job proposal. And what that is a proposal to show this is why I should get the job. Not just an interview, actually for me to put down on paper why I should get this job. And so I did that a few times. And so with the second tech company, I was there for about 1.5 years, another layoff. Wow. And so I've gone through 2 layoffs. And this time around, though, the first time was super hard. The second time, I had more control over that situation. That's another story that I can tell you another time. And then through volunteering, and all of these are people who I met through volunteering, or people who I knew who I volunteered with who introduced me. And then I landed at this nonprofit. At the time, it was only 12 people. And they said, someone who I volunteered with said, hey, can you just chat with my friend? I said, okay. I thought we were just meeting for coffee. And at the end, she said, well, I'm looking for a director of marketing.
Wow.
And I said, I didn't know this was about a job. And she said, well, I'm going on vacation tomorrow, and my boss is going on vacation in 2 days. Can you come tomorrow to interview with him? And they didn't even have a job description.
Wow.
And so, but I put together a proposal of what I want to do based on our conversations.
Oh, wow.
And actually with that one, the person who hired me left after a month. Oh, and actually before that, I had written this job proposal, and she said, you're not going to do that. I said, okay, I'm fine with the job that you've offered me. I was hoping to get something else, but I'm fine with the job that you offered me. After she left, my CEO said, that job description you wrote, that job proposal you wrote, that's what you're going to do. I didn't even know he had read it.
Wow.
So my point here is it was really helpful for me to write down, what do I want?
Wow.
And why do I think I would be good? And what value would I add to this? And specifically me. Specifically, not just generic, but just this is what Julie can uniquely bring to this role. And so regardless if you get the job or not, it's a really good exercise. The first time I did it, I didn't get the job. And the second time I did it, it helped me get the job. And the third time I did it, it helped me get the job I wanted after I'd already accepted the job they offered me.
So you kind of created your own category. And how did you know what you wanted? Is it just based off past experience?
There was actually listening to, so I asked a lot of questions of what they needed. And then I thought about what could I uniquely do to serve that. And also just thinking about the past experiences of, well, what can I add here? And also talking to other people. I remember when I was offered the director of marketing job and I talked to a friend who said, you should be VP of community. And that's what I asked for. And that's originally, you're not going to get that title. And then later on, that's the title I got. And so it was also other people seeing things in me that I didn't see. And I think that can be really helpful too, because oftentimes we can't see our own greatness, our own gifts. And it's helpful to have other people say, you're really good at this.
Wow. So what was your next step after landing all these roles?
So I was at the nonprofit for 6 years, and it was truly the best job I ever had. I was given a lot of freedom. I was empowered to create my own programs. I got to build relationships with community, and I ended up creating a cross-sector collaboration fellowship, bringing together tech, government, and community-based organizations. And in a way, it was like my second real-life PhD in organizational development. So because I'm trained as a historian, and yet my company is in organizational development. And so I started to create this and experiment. And then I talked to someone who was pretty senior in the field. And he said, you don't even know what you don't know. So you don't know all the things that you're discovering right now. Oh, okay. And then I remember another conversation with a friend who was an HR leader. And she mentioned the word OD, or the acronym OD. And I said, what's OD? And she said, it's organizational development. And that's what you're doing. Really? And I was kind of just doing things by feel and just bringing together volunteers to see if they could build something and seeing what helped them build trust quickly. And so I actually think a lot of times formal training can actually hurt us because it can tell us this is what you're supposed to know.
Right.
And what I ended up doing was creating something that was very much informed by my community building. And it was just, wow, if we can get volunteers, if we can help volunteers build trust quickly and build something when they're doing that for free, imagine what we could do with people who are paid to work together. And so that's when I was just, I think we can make this into a company and not just serve the tech industry, which was our main beneficiary at the time. We can actually do this with other people as well. I'm
so curious, through all of these ups and downs, and you said you were kind of finding ways to be curious and spontaneous, because we're usually through the educational system taught this is step A, this is step B, and following that path. And then eventually you carved your own path. How did your identity shift and change as you were going through those experiences that you didn't even see coming or had time to plan for?
That's a great question. I had to let go of external validation in terms of institutional validation. Because before, my worthiness was tied to, especially in academia, is tied to what school I went to, where I published, where I was going to get my fellowships. And I had to let go of that because now I'm working at my family's Vietnamese newspaper, right? And I've been laid off twice. and so I really had to let go of that. I think that in terms of what was consistent, at first for a long time, I thought it was, I'm a storyteller. And I realized, no, it's not. No, I'm not a storyteller. Actually, the consistent theme is I'm a dot connector. And so what I mean by that is I am actually, and I don't think of myself as a problem solver. I used to use that term, especially when I was working in tech. I solve problems. And actually, there are a lot of problems I don't know how to solve. I don't know the solutions. I can probably connect you with someone who does, though.
Oh.
And that's what I mean by dot connector. I am constantly connecting with people, and I'm seeing, oh, this person and this person has a need, and that person can help. So let me connect them.
Oh, wow.
And I then just become the connector. And actually, I remember my first Chamber of Commerce conference, and because I joined the chamber as part of learning about business, and that's where I also got exposed to the E-Myth that I was telling you about. You got to spend 20% of your time working on your business. And they talked, the keynote speakers talked about Oprah and how Oprah's power is actually not in talking about herself, but in talking about promoting all these other people. And so she actually becomes this really big connector. And so that's, or just, oh, my theme is being a dot connector.
How did you figure that out?
I think it was listening to how other people would describe me.
Oh.
Right? Because then it's just, oh, Julie, you just know everyone. You're so connected. Oh, okay. And then also seeing the joy that I got from bringing people together who wouldn't normally be together. Because actually sometimes I don't have, I like a lot of variety in my friendships. So I don't need to see people often. It can be very infrequent. I have a lot of friends though. And then I have some friends who need more time. And then I would actually connect them with other people who need more time. Right? It's like, oh, well, you need this and you need this and you like to hang out all the time and I just don't have time for that. So let me, and I think that's also just letting go of it has to be about me. No, actually, you go and make your own magic. I'm just connecting you.
You're so cool. Wow. One of the things you were talking about, though, that really struck me was how you learned a lot about yourself by listening to what other people had to say about yourself. Because it's just like I had a little epiphany moment when you said that, because I'm always trying to define myself. Like I wake up in the morning, I'm like, who am I today? But it's like, oh my gosh, like you could just ask. Would people just say it out of nowhere?
Yeah, they would just say it. And it was actually that advice from that one mentor who had told me, Julie, you're smart, but a lot of people are smart. He also said, come up with 3 words that you would like people to know you by. And I think for some people who are just, modesty, it could be really hard to think of how do I want people to describe me. So one exercise is think about someone you admire. How would you describe them? And you can also just ask people, hey, how would you describe me? And it's really interesting to hear that, because it's just, wow, I never would have thought of myself that way. I mean, people have also used the word strategic. It's like, oh, strategic. Like, I wouldn't have thought of that. Or I remember my mentor and sponsor, who's also a sponsor, in this letter of recommendation, he used the word integrity. I wouldn't have thought of that. And so it's really interesting to hear what other people have to say.
I love, too, the idea of thinking about who you want to be or how you want to be known rather than who you currently are or who you have been in the past. So there's that possibility for change that exists for everyone.
Yeah.
Wow. We're constantly evolving.
Absolutely. I mean, once we stop evolving, that's game over.
That's true. That's true. Well, we talked a lot about your past. I wanted to talk about where you are today. What have you been up to? Maybe tell us a little bit about CuriosityBased and your book.
I started CuriosityBased in the middle of the pandemic. And so it was, and I decided to start it because I wanted to own my work. And so this is, I think, something else for people to think about, just as I was creating something and it was just, oh, if I'm an employee, I can't own my work. My employer owns my work. So that's something to really think about. But if I own my work, what that means is I also have to take responsibility for that. And so that was a big risk, because I was leaving something good. A lot of entrepreneurs tell you, oh, I hated my job and that's why I left. I wanted to create something better. I was actually leaving something really, really good. And when I left, I had some interns at the time, and I knew they would lose their positions if I were to leave. And it's just, okay, well, I've got to bring them with me. And so I also took the risk of being an employer. So I think that, yes, there's entrepreneurs, this big general word for someone who starts a business or starts a new enterprise. And then there is employer. And that means that you have the responsibility of paying for other people, which is different from just taking care of myself. There's the solopreneur. You may have heard of that, right? It's just me. And a lot of people who are entrepreneurs are solopreneurs. Being an employer brought such a scary sense of responsibility because it's not just me. Other people's livelihood are also resting on me. So even though I don't have children, I have payroll. And so I'm constantly thinking about that. And I think it makes me a lot more courageous than I normally would be, because it's not just about me. It's about my team. It's about their livelihood. It's about their ability to thrive. It's about our ability to grow as an organization, because they've also invested their hopes in this too. So today we are going into our 4th year, and the first year was okay. Second year was hard. We lost money. Third year, we did a lot better than we ever had. Fourth year, I'm not sure. Because we're in an economic downturn right now, and I see recession, I see layoffs all around us. And so all I can do is promise my team, I don't know, I try to really manage expectations. I don't know when I can increase salaries. I don't know when I can increase hours. I'm going to personally commit that no one's getting laid off. So that's where I am now. It's just constantly thinking about that. And I think it's just that tension of with freedom comes responsibility. With opportunity comes responsibility. And I've chosen this, and that means that I'm also responsible for this. And I'm grateful also that the team we all have this collective effort together. So, I mean, and I share that because it's being an entrepreneur, there are hard days. There are really hard days. And I remember learning so much from my dad, and from both my parents, but really my dad taught me that you have to love the work so much. You have to love the work so much. And you have to be willing to take the lows with the highs. You have to ride that roller coaster, because yes, there is an opportunity to make a lot of money, but there's also a lot of risk. And so I grew up with a understanding of that risk and having high risk tolerance. And so that's, you ask me where I'm today. It's just like I'm in it, and every day it's just, here's the hustle. And I'm also, as I look back and I think about what my parents taught me, they taught me so much about courage and to just get out there. My mom's fearless. The things that she asked for, I'm just, oh my gosh, I can't believe you asked for that. Wow. Okay. You got it. You got it too.
Wow.
And so, what my parents did not teach me, though, what they could not teach me was how to be organized. They couldn't teach me systems. They couldn't teach me how to scale, because they weren't able to do that. And a lot of, I think, mom and pop shops don't ever grow beyond a certain size because they are so in the business. Again, it goes back to they're working in their business, not working on their business. And I've had to just seek outside mentorship and support and education to learn how to get to that next level, because I dream of having a business that's much bigger than the one that my parents had. And even now it's actually the size of my business is larger than the newspaper right now.
Wow.
And the profit margins are a lot higher than the newspaper. And so, yeah. And I also think that there's opportunity for a lot more.
Congratulations. That is a huge accomplishment.
There was a time where they made a lot more money, but right now I'm saying, like, where the newspaper is right now, where my business is, right now.
You talked about navigating lows and highs. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the lows? We don't get to have a glimpse of those often.
Yeah. I mean, a year and a half into my business, it should have been the best of times because I had just come out with my book, and I was so focused on promoting the book. I just didn't check my profit and loss. I didn't check my finance statements. And all I was concerned about was, can I make payroll every month? And then a year and a half in, I realized, oh, I'm able to make payroll because I'm putting money into the business. So it's what they call owner's investment. That's how I'm managing this cash flow. That's actually not real revenue. And that was quite a wake-up call to see that. And when I realized that, at first I was just so embarrassed. And I thought, oh my gosh, what do I do? And I remember calling a friend who does a lot of economic development. And he said, Julie, a lot of business owners go through this. They don't manage their cash flow. He shared with me, I know someone who sold his car 3 times to make payroll. And I was like, what? And this happens. And I think that there's this narrative about the entrepreneur just, I financed everything on credit cards, but I took the risk and now everything is great, right? And it's just like, that's the story people tell. They don't tell the story of, I didn't check my P&L and I didn't manage my cash flow, because that part is not, it's real. And yet that's the part, because it's just, oh, I feel like I should have known that. And once he said that, I was just, wow, there's so much we don't talk about. And so I started to talk to other entrepreneurs and get real about, hey, how are you managing this? And after a few days, I decided to tell my team, because I was just, oh, should I tell my team or not? And I decided I'm going to tell them just where we're at, and that basically the second year is me going into a loss and going into my savings to keep the business afloat.
How do you even deal with that mentally?
It was really hard. It was hard, and it was scary. And at the same time, I didn't really see any alternative. I didn't think, oh, I got to go get a job. That was not an alternative. It was just, I'm just going to have to make this work. And I also had my parents to look at, and I saw how they withstood a lot of that. And it's just what my dad said about, look, with highs come lows, and there's a roller coaster, and you just have to try to make as much money during the good times so you can absorb the bad times. And I really saw them do that during the pandemic and during the Great Recession. It's just like, we just have to absorb this and be really frugal. And I think that actually that frugality from when I worked at the newspaper, I still carried it through the rest of my career, even when I was making way more money in tech. And I just was no, you can't spend that money, because we had so little. And that actually gave me freedom later on, because I had a lot of friends who were stuck in jobs that they hated, but they had started these really lavish lifestyles that they felt that they had to sustain. These high mortgages, high car payments, a certain lifestyle that they were just, I really like this lifestyle. And because I had that experience at the newspaper, I really think that the frugality gave me freedom. And I was able to make the decision to leave my job and have employees.
Wow.
And it was because it's like, my safety net is my savings, and I've accumulated that, and that gives me the freedom to make some choices. But it's still scary, right? Because it's like, I don't want to deplete my savings. And so I'm glad that I didn't have to do that last year. but yeah, I mean, I think how I've been able to cope with it is just understanding I'm not alone. And that often means I had to share first, because a lot of people don't like to talk about money. And they don't like to talk about, oh, I wasn't able to do this or that. And it's just, no, let's get real. It's just like, it was a hard month.
Wow.
I went in the red, or like, this is how I'm managing now. Because I've gotten so much more organized, I can see that. I can plan for that.
You said a lot about your father, and it sounded like he taught you a lot about business and about life.
My father was just my biggest cheerleader. So he passed away in March 2021. So we're coming up on the third year anniversary now. And he was just so, I have two younger brothers. He really believed in us. And he was just, do what you want to do. And he would just really support us. And we were all so different. And none of us, I think, my youngest brother, quite a late bloomer. I think we all kind of took our time, right, trying to figure some things out. And he was just super, super supportive. And he was a quiet man. He was a gentle man, very connected to the community. And I'm so grateful for that time that I got to work with him. I remember once, I was like, why are we putting these people on the front page? They didn't really do anything that important. And why are we going to this party? And he taught me, no, you just got to help people when you can, because they might be able to help you later on too. Right? And that's just what community, or it's just like being in community. And there's this give and take. And he had this way of asking for help that made people feel proud to give, feel honored to give. And what I saw was we were able to do so much more. And he was also very proud of being a refugee. He was just, make that part of your identity. Talk about it, because that means we're resilient. Look at all the things we've been able to do in our short time here with our little resources. And I just realized how different that was from talking to other Vietnamese Americans, where it's just, we were told to assimilate, or we were told, hearing this narrative of being victims or being less than. And that's not the narrative that my parents modeled for me and talked about openly.
That's beautiful. What about your mom?
I think my mom is just fearless. I mean, I think that there is something about when we don't know what we don't know, we just go for it. and that was my mom. That is my mom. And so even now, she has a boldness and a persistence. I mean, she really is quite stubborn and persistent in getting what she wants. And there are times when I have a bit of that too. So
I love that. That's kind of what you need to make it. You talked a little bit about how relationships are really important to you and connecting the dots. What's your take on relationships and friendships and navigating all of that?
So one of my mentors, this is actually someone who I met through volunteering, and then he became a sponsor as well. I consider he and his wife, my Japanese parents. And so he's a longtime exec at IBM. And he said about relationship building, he said compound interest. Compound interest. And what he meant by that was you invest in relationships and they will grow and they'll pay dividends in ways that you don't expect. Right? There are going to be some that are really rich later on, and there's some that are kind of just, but it's about having this mix of having all these different relationships and just expecting that some are gonna pan out and some aren't, and that's okay. And that what's also been amazing is there are people who I knew years ago, and then they pop up again. And we haven't talked in years, yet because we had volunteered together, because we had some really great conversation, we'll do work again. So I'm a big believer in staying in touch. It's so easy to think, just like, stay in touch. Actually, a lot of people don't do that. And so what that might mean is, what it looks like for me is I see their birthday reminder on Facebook. I'll text message them, happy birthday. Right? I send out an email every year that's kind of like a email update. And yet it's personalized because I only send it to people who I can actually say something personal to. And so I think there's just this maintaining relationships. And even if they don't write back, I then will run into them like, I read your email. I've been meaning to get back to you. So actually it's just about trying to keep in touch with people. And also I think relationships take risk. Not just romantic relationships, friendships take risks. I have some friends who just, oh, I asked you out on a friend date, right? Like, then that's going to happen. They're going to be people who we really click with, people who we think we should click with because of all of these external indicators. And yet, I remember asking someone out on a friend date, and we walked, and it was, I think at the end, both of us were just, yeah, great walk. Right. And to expect that it's just kind of a numbers game. There's going to be some people we click with, some people we don't, and some people we might not click with right away, some people who we have a deep connection with and then we don't talk to for years and then they pop up again. And I think it's just about maintaining all of those, just staying open to the possibility of those relationships that they can come back.
What qualities do you gravitate to in people?
That's a great question. I think curiosity, right? Just curiosity, people who are genuinely interested in reciprocity, where it's just, I ask a question, they answer, they ask me a question, that there's this back and forth, that it's not just one way. And then a willingness to be generous. And what I mean by that is just generous in spirit, generous in whatever they can share. I'm not talking about financial here. And so I'd say curiosity, openness, generosity of spirit. Yeah.
That's beautiful. What about like with, I know our society really emphasizes like companionship and like romantic relationships. I'm curious what your take on that is, and, you know, like the modern love and kind of that space.
I think that there's a lot of expectations of the way that relationships should progress. You meet someone, then you date, and then the next goal milestone is to move in together. And then from there's marriage, and then from there's kids. And I had grown up in a traditional household where I saw that, and I thought that was the path that I would follow. And even though it's just, I don't know if I actually want to have kids. And so about 10 years ago, I met my partner, and we are very clear we're never going to live together. And I mean, in the beginning, it was just, oh, that's what we're supposed to do. And he has 2 kids from a previous marriage, and realized that he's got his life. His kids will always be his number one priority. I know that. I am not competing with his kids. And I also don't want to be a babysitter, right? And I'm not the step parent. And I think that's shocking to people. Sometimes like, oh, does that mean that you don't care about them? No, that just means that they're his responsibility, not mine. And that means that I get to be a partner in that I'm listening to him, and I'm not a backseat parent, right? I'm not giving him advice because I don't have any experience with that. So I think that there's something about thinking about, are these conventions working for you? And I don't want to say conventions are bad. It's just, are they working for you? Because if they are, great. And I also think that there's this expectation that people should live together. Being a good roommate and being a good companion are 2 different things. And I think that we can actually take each other for granted when we live with each other, because I know with my partner and I, when we're together, we are focused on one another. We're not checking our phones. We're not multitasking. We're not watching TV. It's just the quality time that we have together. Even though it's a lot less time, it's actually more meaningful time. And so and living together and all the annoyances and responsibilities of living together can actually take away from having a meaningful relationship. Now, I know some people think, oh, that's just life, that's just compromise. Honestly, if you can afford not to live together, don't live together. So I think the only way we would live together is if we cannot financially afford to not have our own households. And I'll say another thing. A lot of times people live together so they can buy more stuff. So they can have a bigger house. And then it just kind of gets into this, well, now we have bigger space, so we got to buy more stuff. And that's another thing to navigate too, because money is a big problem in a lot of relationships, how people want to spend their money. And so it's just, okay, if you want to spend your money on that, that's fine. I'm not going to spend my money on that. And we've decided to have separate priorities around money. We don't have to compromise. I don't think that actually, I don't think that you have to prove your love for one another.
Right.
You have to if you can't financially afford to otherwise.
Wow, that's so interesting. And it makes sense. It's like I've never heard like a win-win quite like that.
Yeah, and I think actually what's interesting now is there are a lot more couples who aren't living together. And I know the beginning for, I think, the first 5-7 years of my relationship, people are just, are you serious? Are you guys committed? You're not going to move in together? And now it's just 10 years later. It's just, oh, okay.
Wow.
This is a thing.
Yeah, I love this pattern of seeing conventional norms and being like, okay, cool, I'm still going to do my own thing. Like going on this path and then deciding this is my life and this is what I want to do. That's so powerful and that's really cool.
And it's really done out of being true to what I prioritize and what's practical. I'm a very practical person. It's not because I want to be a rebel, right? It's not because, marriage is whatever. I don't believe in the institution of marriage. It's great for people to get married if that works for them.
Right.
I'm more of just do your own thing and do what works for you. And I'll say another thing about just relationships is it took me quite a while for me to really appreciate how my partner and I don't say I love you. We say I'm grateful.
Wow.
And that's because I realized that after numerous relationships, what I actually wanted was to be appreciated. I didn't want to be taken for granted. And so the essence of love for us is gratitude. I see you. I'm not going to take you for granted. And so instead of saying, I love you, we say, I'm grateful.
That's beautiful. One last thing on relationships and love. How did you come to love yourself? Or maybe it was there from the start.
No, it took quite a while. And I mentioned in my late 20s thinking I'm not interesting. I'm not an interesting person. And it was really seeing my best friend, I think, have that generosity of spirit with other people. And then just, honestly, age has a lot to do with it. Because it gets to the point like, I'm just me. I mean, like, the way I dress, people have made comments on, is that what you're wearing? I'm like, yeah, that's what I'm wearing. Right? This is, yeah. And so, so I think that it's probably a bit of, it was me, well, let me try this. Oh, I'm still accepted here. And I'm a big believer in the content of things. And what I mean is, so I really like dinner parties. I have mismatched utensils and silverware. The food is okay. I mean, it's like tasty, but it's not like fancy food by any means. And it's simple food. What I care about is making sure people feel connected and they have a deep, meaningful conversation. That's what I focus on. And there are other friends who have beautiful placemats and decor and the food is, wow, this is so impressive. I'm thankful for those friends. That's a treat for me, right? And yet that's not the thing that I focus on. And so in terms of loving myself, it's just like, yeah, this is my special thing and they have their special thing. And we're not competing. We just all have our own special qualities that we're known for. And it's about abundance. And that I think allows for loving myself because I'm not competing with someone else. And that took a while to not just, because I didn't have to be less than because I'm comparing myself.
That's so beautiful. I love the full circle. Okay, I have a few closing questions for you. It's a little bit about where you're going, but what's your definition of success? And if it's changed, do you feel successful? And where do you want to go?
So I like to think of what does success look like and what does it feel like. And so in terms of looks like, that's what is it, tangible, measurable, or an event. Feels like is that intangible, it's that feeling. And so I remember when I was considering starting my business and a friend asked me, well, what does success look like to you? And I really struggled that time because it was, I don't know how to answer this question, even though I'd been asked that question numerous times and asked other people. And I realized it's because we don't ask what does success feel like. And so what I wanted success to feel like is still what I want it to feel like today and in the future. Freedom. It's freedom to make my choices, to write my content, to not have to ask permission. And I was worried about telling my dad that I was going to leave my nonprofit executive job in the middle of the pandemic. And he said, I'm so happy for you because now you will have freedom. You never have to worry about losing your job again. And I thought, oh, why was I so afraid? That's what he and mom did, right? They left okay. And so that freedom is something that's super important to me and when I think about freedom, I mean, I get to choose. I get to make my mistakes. I get to make my bad decisions. They're mine, right? And that means, so with opportunity comes responsibility, and I'll take responsibility for them. So that's what it feels like. What it looks like is one day I want for people to talk about some forms of respect the way they talk about love languages. I want people to assume we respect one another. We just have different ways of looking at that. And let me tell you, here's a way, think about it in terms of we have different forms, just the way people talk about, we have different languages for love. And to help people communicate better and to have better relationships. And if we can help promote that, then that's what success looks like.
I love that so much. Wow, that was just beautiful. Yeah, I'm just still thinking about what you're saying. I actually, when I was going through your book, I highlighted one of the things you were saying. I think it was like the 7 forms of respect, and I wrote love languages ? Because it reminded me of that, and I was like, wow, I wish more people knew about respect because it's not something we think about all that frequently. But now I'm definitely thinking about it more because it's just as important as love.
I think it's because we take it for granted. We just think, and we just talk about it as if we mean the same thing, and yet we don't. We don't. Right. There'll be different things that make us, we can agree on how it feels, but we disagree on what does it look like.
Ooh, right. And respect is a form of love, or can be.
Well, I think, yes, but also respect and love are different.
Oh, okay.
You can love someone and not respect them, and you can respect someone and not love them. And sometimes I want respect, but I don't care if you love me or not.
Oh, interesting. Well, thank you for bringing me through your life and all these relationships. I felt like I really got to live vicariously through you and experience so many of the ups and downs that you went through. Is there anything else that you wanted to add that I didn't ask about, or that you didn't have an opportunity to share?
I mean, we covered a lot, Sam.
Oh, yeah.
I'm trying to think if there's, I also feel like we could keep talking for hours.
We could.
And so I'm trying to think if there's anything, I'll share this one thing for talking about relationships that I think especially for your audience. There's this book by Shel Silverstein. There are 2 books, actually. So Shel Silverstein, he's most known for The Giving Tree. And so he has illustrated books that are supposedly for children, but they're really for adults. And so, and my partner gave me this book early on in our relationship. And so I'm just going to recount the story. So there's one book is called The Missing Piece, and the second book is called The Missing Piece Meets the Big O. And so in The Missing Piece, it's imagine that there is this pizza-like shaped thing with a piece missing, right? A wedge missing. And so it's rolling along, and it's saying, I'm looking for my missing piece. I'm looking for my missing piece. And it encounters different wedges. Some are too big, some are too small. Finally, it meets a wedge that fits perfectly. And they're rolling fast, smooth. But then the wedge starts to grow and grow. And then the wheels, what are you doing? You're growing. And the wedge says, I didn't know I was going to grow. And they don't fit anymore. So they have to break up. Then the second book comes from the perspective of the wedge. The wedge is waiting there, waiting to get picked up, trying to make itself attractive. And there are these different wheels coming by, and some have too many pieces in them. Some have too many pieces missing. Some are too big, some are too small. Finally, there's this big wheel. And the wedge says, are you my missing piece? And the wheel says, no, I'm the big O. And the wedge says, oh, well, I'm waiting to get picked up. I'm waiting for my missing piece. And the big O says, well, why don't you just roll by yourself? And the wedge says, well, I can't do that. My edges are sharp. And the big O says, well, if you roll, your edges will wear down. I got to go. Bye. So the big O rolls off. And the wedge is like, is waiting. Well, let me try this. Starts flopping and then flipping and bouncing. And the wedges and the edges wear down. Becomes his own little wheel.
That's so cute.
And so it's rolling and then sees the big O. And they are rolling side by side. They don't complete each other. They are already complete. And so my point here is sometimes we think we're looking for someone to complete us. And we have to actually go through those bumps and those flips and so that our edges will wear down and that we are comfortable rolling by ourselves. And I feel that with my partner, that we are just rolling side by side. He gave me that book. And I love, I actually gift this book as a wedding gift to people. It's just, you have to be your own wheel.
That's so beautiful. Thank
Shel
you.
Silverstein. So it's not
Yes.
my story. I want to credit Shel Silverstein, The Missing Piece, and The Missing Piece meets the Big O.
Oh, you tell it really well. And it fits so well with the story of the stories that you shared. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for inviting me to have this conversation with you today.
Of course. Thank you, Julie. You absolutely made my day. It was really, I'm grateful, genuinely, to have met you. So, yes. Cool. That's a wrap.
Okay.